got it.
Yay, Angela. Oh, we had a pre-conversation, but I hadn't seen or talked to you for, gosh, a couple of months now. I don't even know. Time is just whack.
Yeah.
But you were very instrumental in guiding me through very recently, actually, this last Venus descent, which it was like December. When did it start?
It started with Venus's retrograde in December 19th, 2021, and that went through January 29th, 2022.
And it happens roughly every 18 months. Is that correct? Where we have this Venus descent. So just for the listeners who may not know what a Venus descent is, and then we'll kind of build on, because it's very integral to our discussion today, everything that denotes in terms of the descent journey. But how would you explain to our listeners what the Venus descent was about this last cycle?
So yes, Venus retrogrades every 18 months. And her cycle is about a 40-day cycle. It's a very significant kind of spiritual passage, initiation process that we are collectively invited to undergo. And mythologically, the retrograde of Venus symbolizes the descent into the underworld. And so it's this process, basically a way to look at it is that Venus, when she turns retrograde, she descends into the underworld for approximately 40 days or so, and she reemerges. And it's a process of death and rebirth. And so in the sky, what this looks like is when she first goes retrograde and the underworld journey begins, she's last seen in the sky as the evening star. And then she disappears from the western horizon. And after 40 plus days or so, then she reemerges as the morning star in the eastern horizon. And so she's gone through this huge underworld initiation journey. She's completely transformed and she's rebirthed on the other side of this process as a morning star. And so the program that that you went through with me and that you're referencing is called Descent into Truth. And it's a powerful channeled,
it's very powerful
channeled real-time journey through the underworld in tandem with Venus during her retrograde cycle that I received as a vision for the last time Venus was retrograde in 2020. And
wow, 2020 was the last one. That does make sense.
Yeah, it was May and June of 2020, which is a real spicy time on the planet. So
yes, there was a lot.
Yeah.
And Venus, and we'll get into, I want to get into your background a little bit and how this came into your life and into your path. But Venus is a very feminine planet. And the fact that it was coming into 2022, like the onset of 2022, which is also a very feminine number. And we're in this era of the feminine. And it's just almost like, okay, I'm going to drop down in 2020 for y'all. And then I'm coming back into the onset of 2022. And for me, it just felt so timely to sort of, for lack of a better term, descend into the shadows that I didn't look at the 18 months prior because there was so much mayhem on the planet and so many things happening. And then coming back into like, oh, now this is where it really gets personal. This is where I really get to, what I loved about it is that Venus in this descent is like with you. It's not like she bails. It's like, I'm here with you. And for those people who are like, how can a planet be with you? It's hard to explain, but there's just this essence that was very present for me. And having you voice and sort of midwife us through that process, going down into the underworld and sort of like facing that shadow, it was less ominous to really look at my shadows when there was a group container for it. And then with your guidance and the things that were coming through you with transmissions, it was just super powerful. So we'll get into this because I have some notes that I took during that, and I definitely want to visit that, especially as it relates to our topic, which is going into the unknown and entering the void and what that means. But obviously you had to do that in a big way because of the work you're doing now. Every time I see someone empowered who's like guiding people into, the path of truth, the descent into truth, they themselves have had to go through a whole metamorphosis. And I was asking you earlier, like, Angela, I don't really know that much about what you used to be like. And you're like, I wasn't always like this. So that's really intriguing to me. So why don't you just kind of take us through maybe some highlights of how this priestess path found you and where you were at previous.
Well, yeah, there's definitely so much there. I call it my path of awakening, basically, is where it all began for me. Before the terminology or the awareness of priestess ever came to me, I was already embodying the role of a priestess without knowing it, I suppose. But before, like, basically, I've lived in the desert in Joshua Tree, in the very same little remote isolated cabin out in the desert for 11 years now. And
for those of you not watching, I'm like shaking my head in awe because that feels like I would be scared, like straight up, to live by myself in the middle of the desert. But anyway, we can get to that later. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's
super brave.
That's the thing. Like, this was the move to the desert is what changed everything. It was a huge indication that something in me was changing, because even the idea of just moving somewhere brand new would have terrified me previously, to the point of like not even considering it. Like, I would have had to do something like that, at least with another person, or know people where I'm going. And in this circumstance where I was at in my life, up until that point, I was in my late 20s. I was going through my Saturn return, which completely like ripped me apart. And
usually
if
people get
aren't
that
familiar with the Saturn return,
it happens in your 20s, doesn't it? Typically,
it happens around the age of 28 to roughly. And so Saturn is like this disciplinary teacher, and basically, if you're not on path, if you're not in alignment with your truth, he's going to, like, rip you to shreds, kind of thing. Your life is going to fall apart. And it's like a initiation process to help you, find your truth, essentially. And so that's where I was at. I had lived my entire life up until that point very much asleep and very, very disconnected to myself, not understanding the concept of self-love, self-care, anything like that. I call it just a very average life. I was a very standard Americanized raised child, and had that kind of upbringing. And I've always lived in Southern California, and in the like 10 years before the desert, I was living near the beach in Long Beach, and then I moved into the city in LA and Silver Lake for several years. And that's where everything, during that time frame, the last 4 years is where things had crumbled. And it was basically the crux of it all was a relationship.
Of course.
And and that's the most powerful thing. Yeah, it's like the thing that really gets your attention, obviously, when you go through that level of deep heartbreak and that level of pain. And so I had enough life experience at that point where, when that happened, it devastated me, but and it was literally, up until this point in my life, present time, it was the darkest period of my entire existence. And I had enough experience, so at that point, where I recognized, once I got through certain levels of grief and mourning, and just letting myself be a victim, I recognized at some point, you know what? I'm tired of being the victim. I do this all the time. I was starting to recognize patterns in my own behavior. I was starting to recognize patterns in the kind of job choices I was making. Like nothing was working out. And everything was like not working out simultaneously, suddenly.
Mm.
And so I had the ability to start recognizing these patterns and taking responsibility for the first time in my life. Like, you know what? I made these choices. I invited this into my life. And so that little subtle shift in my thinking was massive, and that was huge. And so it went from being in the depths of pain and suffering to something that was the seed of awakening in me. Like, okay, I accepted that happened, and I can be grateful that it happened, because now I feel like I can let it go, and I feel like I'm ready to move forward in a whole brand new way, where I don't identify as the victim anymore, where I don't blame other people for my problems, and I take responsibility for everything. So it was a very empowered kind of moment, and probably the first of my life at that point.
Mm.
And basically that just put me on a trajectory of being very open to the world, because I had been very closed down for a long time and I was tired of it. And I was ready to explore and see new things and go new places and meet new people. And it basically brought me to Joshua Tree for the first time with a group of friends. And it was just like a few hours for a day trip, but it completely changed my life. Like I had no idea. I'd never been to the desert before, even though I'd lived a few hours away always. I'd never gone.
Mhm.
And I was not prepared for it. I didn't believe that I would care about the desert, because I'm so water oriented
Mhm.
that I always
Mhm.
just like the idea of the desert is
Well,
was
that because
generally,
it's like Angela de la Agua. That's
yeah,
water.
yeah, it's
Angela of the
of the
water.
water. Yeah, I was very, very, very identified with water. And so yeah, I didn't believe that the desert would have anything for me at all, but I didn't care at that point. It was just like, I just want to go new places, I'll go anywhere kind of thing, because I had never really gone beyond the comfortable parameters of Southern California, really not traveling much at all and anything like that. So I came out to Joshua Tree, and like it's renowned for the national park and the beauty and the magic there, but we didn't even make it into the park. We were just driving through town, just
Mm.
driving through the town, and something shifted in me. I was just like, wow, like I felt the energy of it, and I felt myself wondering, what would it be like to live out here? And it was like such an interesting thought that came through. And so basically, after that trip, I came back as much as I could, as often as I could, which was never often enough, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was about 8 months of kind of doing as many little weekend trips as I could by myself. And that in of itself was a huge thing. Like I started making these trips by myself, which I didn't even know was a thing that a person could do. I didn't. I'm like, because I started coming out with other people, and I'm like, you know what? I just want to be here by myself. This is so interesting. And I was discovering something really brand new within myself. I was making a connection with myself out here. And the desert really provides that foundation, that template, for connectivity. And so I felt a liberation and wanting to do these things by myself. And so it
Did you
was like
have
this,
fear too? Because I would think,
for the fear
yeah.
piece. Yeah. I was just going to say that like because of my readiness and the place where I was at, like fear was not even present. I
Wow.
was just so excited and so
Mm.
ready, and just plunging myself into these unknown experiences in the desert. And about 8 months into that dynamic of still living in LA and coming out on trips, it was like this really pivotal moment of being in the national park at the end of a weekend trip. I was sitting at sunset on this beautiful boulder and watching the sunset, and knowing that after I got off the boulder, I'd have to get in my car and go back to the city and to get back to work the next day. And I was so sad. I was so depressed at the thought of doing that. And that's how it was every time. Like I was so happy in the desert and so sad to leave. And so it was just a moment of a flicker of awareness rose up in me in that moment. And I recognized like, wow, if I'm so in bliss and so at peace where I am right now on this boulder, watching the sunset. And it's so depressing, the thought to go back to the city. I don't actually have to do that.
Mm.
I can stay here. I don't have to go back to the city. And it was this huge, huge shift of my freedom, of recognizing my freedom, and that I have the power to make choices to change my life. And that particular moment was the defining moment of me just embracing the absolute unknown. And within, I did have to get off the boulder at that time and go back.
Yeah.
But it was a
Okay.
different sort of reason. Then it was like,
Yeah.
I'm going back to the city to wrap up my
To
life
get
here
things,
and
yeah,
move out. And
settled.
so in 2 months, I was living in Joshua Tree in the same place where I'm at right now.
That's crazy. Crazy in a good way, but there's a couple of things you said there that were like ultimate truth bombs.
Mm.
Is I feel like on the path of awakening, like you're being stationed somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Like your higher self, God, the universe, they want to station you somewhere physically. And I think a lot of people feel that call, like when they
Mm.
visit somewhere, or, there's never any accidents of where we actually end up, but sometimes we resist. And this is metaphorical, not just in where you're actually physically living or moving or what have you, but even your soul calling, even the group of people that are calling to connect to you. It's like you have to find something within yourself that's like permission. Like,
Mhm.
I don't have to play the programs I've been playing. I don't have to stay in the 9 to 5. I don't have to stay beholden to this tribe of people or these relationships or this location. I get to construct and co-create my life
Mhm.
in the way that my heart is calling. And I feel like more people are awakening to that, that it's almost like they have to galvanize with other groups or teachers to kind of solidify that permission within themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it helps to hear a story like this because, I mean, again, like I didn't even know it was something a person could do to even take a trip by myself. Like I just was so used to like just letting others dictate my life or looking to
Yeah.
others to see what to do, following other people.
Yeah.
And, so it was like the recognition of free will, that awakening was
Mm,
really profound. And you were speaking to the calling of the heart, and that's really what it was. It was me finally dropping into the heart space and recognizing this is what the heart wants, and I know nothing more. I know nothing more than this is what my heart wants, and that the desert is clearly calling me here. Like it's undeniable with the ease and support that surrounded it all. Like the fact that it brought me into this little dream home that's been my, grounded in, deeply rooted in home for 11 years. It's amazing.
mm,
That it was the beginning of my learning about what that even means to follow the heart, to follow the guidance of the heart. And that has come to be defining of all the work that I do in the world with people, is to know what that is, and
mhm.
to let go of the mind and any kind of fears that come up, or practicalities, things why this doesn't make any sense. Like my dad's voice would be like, this is ridiculous. Like the jobs are in LA. Why in the world would you move
Yeah.
to the desert? There's nothing out there. And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm going to figure, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I just know this
So,
is what my heart wants. And
yeah.
I don't know anyone who lives there. I don't have a plan. And I've never done anything like that before. So it was a huge, huge leap of the faith in the heart.
So, at what point did you realize why you were there, why you were called there?
Well, what point? I guess, so
Or
when I
did you
came
kind of
out,
like always, is it just like obviously it was an embodied knowing, but then
yeah.
was there a point at which there was just this huge bonus or gift that arrived for you because you said yes? Did you
Mhm.
have were you given some kind of a treasure uh from God, universe, whatever, that let you
Mhm.
know that you were being honored for your choice to follow your heart?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I don't know if I've ever really looked at it in that way. I would just, I would just say that um, there was there were initial intentions. I thought that how I would utilize my time out here. Kind of like I'll just, I'll be there for. There were things that my mind presented in terms of this is what you're going to do, and this is how you approach it. You'll do it in a safe way. You'll just stay for 3 months and make a little artist residency out of it. And I created some stories around what it would look like. But the reality was I didn't want to leave, and I just needed to make it feel safe, I guess, on some level for me to make a big move as much as it was. But I would say the treasure that I discovered was how much I enjoyed my own company out in the middle of nowhere by myself and not needing anyone else.
So powerful.
It was, and then this is just coming from a life lived of looking to other people to fulfill me and looking externally for love, for validation, for approval. And because there was a lot of, not a lot, but enough criticism or questioning from the people who surrounded me or family, there was a lot of support, but there was also the critical voices. And just the fact that I was able to move forward and not care basically what anybody thought about it, was the gift. It was like my starting to navigate my life on my heart's terms for the first time. And that's the gift, because that's the gift again that's continued to expand. And learning to, like, fear was a big theme in the beginning, because it was like, wow, I'm in nature. I'm in a place with the big bads of like rattlesnakes and scorpions and coyotes.
Even like I just picture like everything prickly, like the sun is prickly heat and the cactus, and that's how I picture the desert. It's not my happy place. Well, maybe it will be at some point.
It's very prickly here in all those ways. Absolutely. And so it was just like such a, constant daily initiation of like learning about living on my own out in the middle of nowhere, for starters, but so closely connected with nature in a place where it can be read as hostile or uninviting, and that there are all these like potential dangers afoot, literally underfoot. But I was realizing that what I have done here and coming out here was I really plunged into fear. I, could have been afraid of this and I could have let that stop me. But I'm, obviously so ready for it that I just blasted through that and just like ran towards what would be perceived as a fearful thing. And so I took that kind of as a gauge, like, okay, like I'm learning about fear and the power that it holds, because when you move towards the fear, there's a reward there. Like you strengthen something. And this has been my experience with the nature here, with the animals here, with any kind of scary, things that are perceived as the scary things in the desert. Like it's always been a movement towards them to understand and connect and recognize, like, I need to develop a relationship here with these things and know them. And I remember too, like I was because I was afraid, it was just like afraid, but like I'm not leaving it. I'm in it. I'm here and I'm staying in it. And I remember one night in particular, like in the first couple months probably that I lived out here, and walking out in the dark night sky when there was probably a new moon around, and the sky was so dark and the stars were so brilliant that I looked up at the sky, and the enormity of it, the beauty of it, and the power of it completely buckled my knees, and it made me tremble. Wow. And I felt so tiny and so insignificant and so afraid of just like the vastness of the universe that I had to go inside. Like I couldn't even, like, I couldn't handle it. I'm like,
wow. Well, yeah, that I think is going to lead us into this well, two things. I want to talk about this fear we have of being in the unknown,
Mhm,
being in this void, and we'll define void as you see it, but why that is actually your point of power,
mhm,
why that is the catalyst literally for everything kind of opening for you in terms of your evolution, your work, whatever. So
mhm.
can you explain to people, because let me back up. I do this a lot. I say I go and then I come back. For me, I was raised with everything very much laid out. Like, here are the sets
Mhm,
of beliefs. And if you don't adhere to these or believe them or stay in this practice of them, you could say rituals, you could say a lot of things. Um, these ceremonial aspects to rightness and um,
mhm,
religious stuff, as well as, anyway, we all go through rites of passage and we all go through academic and we get to rely on other people's like systems and things. But for me, it was, I think part of the turning point for my awakening was that I recognized I was so comfortable with being handed a set of doctrines or being handed a set of beliefs that some of them didn't feel right to me, and giving myself permission to climb in and ask myself why they didn't feel right is when I
mhm,
started first learning about the feminine and
mhm,
how the embodied state of the feminine is all about. How is this sitting in my being? How is this resonating? But when it comes to the void, I recognized I had a subconscious terror of not knowing, of going in. And you talked about, there's the expanse, right? Where you walked outside and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so small. There's all this. But for me, it was almost like annihilation. It was like if I climb into not knowing and into this blank void, I'm gonna lose myself,
mhm,
which needed to happen actually. That's the
mhm.
paradox.
Exactly. Yeah.
So incubating in that void. But let's define the void and then let's explain how that can actually be, the rebirth, um, the descent journey into the void or the not knowing, what that actually is, the void, and then how you allow that in your fear state, really, and how
Mm,
that actually is the catalyst for the rebirth.
indeed. Well, just to say too that what you were saying a minute ago, that that really core fear you have of the unknown, we all have that. We all have
Yeah.
that. And there's just so much there in terms of the conditioning and the programming that we're all raised in, and how it is a very comfortable way to live. Like, there's comfort in being told what to do, or just knowing what's expected of you,
Yeah.
or what rules it is that you are needing to fulfill. And it's a very comfortable way to be, but it's like the power resides in what's uncomfortable, and learning what it means to let the things that you've been conditioned to believe to fall away and to dissolve away, and to die, and whatever is truly of truth, truly of truth, and in your own being, is something that will be rebirthed. But when and that's like what you're speaking to in terms of the fear of losing the self, because if you let everything that you are die away, then what is left?
Mhm.
And so there's like that inherent trust in a process like this, where we just have to trust that the things that are not us are left behind for good, and that what is the truth of us is what will reemerge and what always remains. And so the void is, you know, a place of nothingness. It's a place of no place. It's pure emptiness. I kind of, when I visualize the void, when I talk about the void, I see it as the mother's womb, I feel it's the place of nothingness, but also the place of pure potential, of the highest creative energies that are waiting to be activated. It's this incubation kind of portal. And I, it's not something that people are conditioned to know how to work with, or to even talk about,
Or
or
to
aware of,
comprehend,
or to
like just the
comprehend really.
comprehension. It's like, how can a void have infinite possibility? Or how can
Right.
some, because most people think of it as like a vacuum, like you're being sucked into something
Mm,
that's going to trash you, because the dark is scary,
hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, you talk about embracing this. I love the mother's moon. That's how I envision it too. I envision it as literally enwombment. But at some point, you just have to surrender.
Hmm.
And so the
Majorly.
paradox for me, the fear was, if I do surrender into this, I am toast. Like I am just, something sinister is going to grab me and not let me go, and I'll
Mm,
never return. That
mm.
that was the shadow fear.
Yeah.
When in actuality, that embracing of it was actually where everything just blew open for me, and things
Beautiful.
just started showing up after that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's the beauty and the power of embracing the shadow
mm,
of going on a journey, like descending into the underworld, is to discover what is residing in that darkness, like what is happening in the shadow realms, because it's holding a tremendous amount of power, and it's holding a tremendous amount of our truth. And because it's in the shadows, because it's something that's hidden away, it's not given the proper kind of attention or love or honor. And so it's like everything that exists within these shadow realms within ourselves is some kind of aspect of our being, some kind of truth of our existence. And the true empowerment comes from the ability to welcome all of who we are, all of our experiences, all of our fears, and just honor them, and just recognize that all of these things are divine. It's all part of the divine expression. It's all divinity, and it's divinity wanting to express itself in
mhm,
all these different kinds of ways.
mhm.
And it's the beautiful thing about being on this planet in a human body, is that it's so vast, it's so complex, and it's infinite what we can experience in these forms and what we can feel. It's like the amount of different feelings we can feel in one day is tremendous. And it's not like this single note existence of bliss on this planet. We get to feel everything. And so it's like this beautiful embodiment for the divine to be able to like have these experiences, and for us as humans to be in these journeys where we get to struggle with it all and just like feel like, no, this is not good, this is not good, this is not divine at all. This is
Yeah.
not divine, this is divine over here, this is not. But to like go on a journey of transformation and a journey of awakening is to, for me anyway, is to recognize the divinity that is in everything, that is in everyone, and that is where we really rise up into truth within ourselves. And that's where we can really walk a path of peace and of alignment, and in
Mm.
a state of compassion and unconditional love for all beings.
What ways have you found to really um, create some felt safety in entering that void? And what is your process for just, okay, here I go. I'm in a place of discontent in whatever area of my life, or maybe it's a daily practice. I went to Joe Dispenza's event in Mexico, and it was right
Mhm.
after we did the Venus descent, and Venus was in the sky at 4 a.m. I think I sent you a
You
picture.
sent me a
I took
photo.
it till like 4 o'clock in the morning. There's Venus. And it was like, oh, and he was teaching us the same thing. It was how to access the nothing, the no
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
But how, you know, everyone has their different ways, I guess, of climbing into that. His was very masculine. It was, you know, very timed with music and choreographed and his voice and things. And that was fine. But I was like, I need this for me. I need to just know how to get into this void in a safe way that I feel
Mhm.
supported so I can really just see what's there for me and surrender into that. We don't typically surrender unless we have that container of safety.
Right. Right. So, well, as you experienced in Descent into Truth, it was definitely, you know, there was for one point, it is helpful to have support from other people who are also going through it. You know, so doing the journey together. So if you have a friend or someone close to you who you're both like in a space of nothingness or going through something that's challenging, just having each other as supports to be like, you know what, we can do this. I'm here for you, you're here for me if we need it, kind of thing. So you don't feel physically alone,
Mhm.
and that you know that there's someone that you can reach out to if needs be, even if it's not someone who's necessarily going through it too, but just as long as you have someone to reach out to, that's everything. I'm blessed by a very strong support team,
Mm.
a strong circle of sisters that I know I can reach out to at any time, kind of thing, and at least someone most likely
Right.
will be there if I really need it. And if they're not, that, because that happens too, then that just tells me I just need to be in it. I just need to be in it and stay with it and not get external and not bring anyone else in. And so, and just trusting that kind of thing. But also with this, the descent into truth, it's like just making this, recognizing it, the sacred experience that it is. So, you know, being very intentional about what's happening and just connecting in with your guidance, with your divine support, and setting up protection for yourself, doing things like anchoring your energy into the earth. So you feel that support from the earth and you feel the
Mhm.
support from the cosmos. You know, there's all
Mhm.
of these different types of gentle tools that you can work with when it's needed, when you need to feel like you're doing it, you want to know that you're doing it in a safe way. And one of my favorite little tips is, it's something that I do every single day. And I always set up a sphere of golden light around myself. And that's just how I start every day on some level. It's not the very, very first thing I do, but when I sit down to meditate,
Mhm.
I'm always establishing a golden sphere of light and grounding my energy into the center of earth, and drawing that energy up through me to establish this sphere of golden light
Right.
around me. As
And
you
I know
know,
you use the
yeah,
tree reference a lot because every time I would go into the meditations that you did, they were always very much like rooting down like you're an
yeah,
actual tree. And then one
yeah.
thing that you brought in that I really appreciated was having like a grandmother tree, apart from me being the tree and being grounded to the earth, but like a grandmother tree in the room with me.
Yeah, yeah,
That
that's
created
beautiful.
a safety for me that I was like, I don't care if it's true or not. I like the idea of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a powerful tool as well. And so, again, anyone can do that at all, like to enhance this sense of protection and bringing a certain vibration of love into your space is by visualizing a great grandmother tree in your room and sending the trunk of that tree all the way down to the core center of earth, and seeing the roots wrapping around the core of Gaia and just drawing up energy. I like to see it as golden light, but you can see it any colors you like, really. But pulling up golden light, we'll say, through the tree trunk back up into the tree in the room, and then that tree is then enveloped in the golden light. It's bringing your room up to the vibration of gold, and that's, you know, that that's so helpful. It's
Yeah.
definitely helpful
Yeah. And
to know that that's in place.
I really love this, and it's very feminine and it's very ancient, and it just feels like, okay, I'm going in with,
Mhm.
this shelter of support really from the ground and from the leaves that and the branches and things. But I want to talk about, you have kind of this process of engaging with a shadow. And by the way, for listeners, we're not talking about evil as a shadow or anything like that. It's not demonic. It's like we're not accessing this void from, to be consumed by darkness.
Mhm.
The intention of accessing this void, would you say what is creation? It's fortification, it's new nuggets of wisdom that are disseminated. I
Well,
mean, there could be
you know,
many.
it could be many things. So I would say essentially a good way to just kind of nutshell it is that we go into the shadow, we embrace the shadow to come into wholeness, so that we embrace all that we are and that
Mm,
we gain wisdom from these hidden parts of ourselves. And that's essentially what the shadow is that that we are speaking to, is that they're all aspects of who we are, the things that we keep repressed or hidden, that the things about ourselves or our life experience that we don't want to look at, that we have buried away, that we have judgment around, or things that trigger us. Anything that's
yeah.
triggering to you is indicating a shadow that is asking for attention. And it's like these aspects of ourselves, these shadow aspects, they want to be loved. That's all
Yeah.
that it is. They want to be loved. They want to be seen and heard and honored. And so to look at the shadow, it's like to do that in a good, safe way, a productive way would be like I had given like a 4-point kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
guide.
I will totally.
Yeah,
I'm going to read that because
yeah, read it.
I wrote it in my journal during our Venus retrograde journey. So, when you were talking about just what I had written is intensified shadow work, like when you know something's been, you said too for us that like the treasure is in the trigger or something like that. So when you
Absolutely.
have that trigger, you go like, oh, this is an invitation for this process of the shadow work. So
Exactly.
the process was, number one, to notice the discomfort. And then you
Mhm.
said number two was to feel it. So letting go of just the story around it, just let
Mm.
yourself feel the feelings associated with it. The third was to inquire, and you had mentioned even having dialogue with those feelings,
Yes.
engaging that way. And like, what are you here to show me? What are you here to teach me? And asking those questions. And then the last one was to express. So this is
Mhm.
where you can even, like you had said, in our work together, expressing gratitude to that shadow for what it's revealing,
Mhm.
what wants to be healed. So I just love that. So notice it, feel it, inquire, and then express.
Yeah.
Is there anything that
And
you would add to that?
I would say expression too can be even like if it is like a big feeling, like something like big anger or rage, it's like express that.
Mhm.
And in a healthy way. And I think one of the examples I like to give anyways, like just screaming into a pillow kind of thing, like let it
Yeah,
be released from the body is kind of part of like what the expression is about. So I would add that in too. Yeah.
I
Yeah, or
think,
to share about it, to share about the experience in just in truth with someone else is another powerful way to express it.
yeah, I love that. There's so much complexity around the feelings we feel. And one thing I've been learning recently is that people are really convincing themselves they're happy. So they're
Mhm.
putting that, um, front, I guess you could say, out into the world, because if people saw my shadows, they wouldn't love me, and then I would be alone and I would get rejected. And I think what
Yes.
we're saying here is, hey, people are going to be drawn to you more when you're a clearer channel of acceptance for yourself and what those shadows are. They may
Right.
never go away. I've been learning a lot about the gene keys. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mhm.
those,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
every gift we have has a shadow side. And it
exactly.
isn't until we experience the shadows that the gift emerges.
Yeah.
We can't avoid them. And my whole religious experience was about stuffing the shadow, denying it, praying it
Mhm.
away, moving away. There's something I'm doing wrong because I'm feeling a shadow.
Yeah.
And that probably did more damage to my developing psyche than the light work.
Yeah.
The light work wasn't working.
Right. Right.
Because I couldn't climb into the shadow because that was evil and dark and scary.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's what the evil is like the condemning of the shadow, like that's evil.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
no, the shadow, it's
Exactly.
not something that we don't do shadow work to get rid of it. It's part of us. It's part of our reality. So it's like we have to integrate the shadow. And so that's what the work is for. That's what embodied, like being a whole being in full divinity, is to have an integrated shadow. And
Mm,
and that's again like going back to just love, like in terms of loving all that we are, and recognizing that when we do that work of moving through shadow experiences, recognizing triggers, no matter how subtle it is, it's like, oh, there's something there. This is
yeah,
something that can happen multiple times a day, to like
sure.
go through a little mini underworld journey.
Even if you
I,
think
you
that
know,
you cleared it before, even if you think you already confronted the shadow and embraced it can show up in a different form
yeah,
later.
absolutely. Absolutely, because it's so complex, because it's so nuanced, and because also it helps us gauge where we're at, because it might take many times for us to get this kind of practice down, where I mean, I'm able to do it because I have put this into practice for years and know every little trigger that happens. I'm just like, oh, okay, I understand. Maybe I'm not in the mood to do it right now, but I get it.
Yeah,
There's like
but I
something to
see
look
it.
at.
I'll come
This
back to
isn't
you later.
the empowering piece, and this goes back to the beginning of my journey, where it was just like recognizing that this is something that's about, that it is not about the other person. This is not someone else's fault or they're doing something to me. This is someone who's triggering me right now and showing me something about myself that is asking for healing, that
Mm,
is asking for integration, that is asking to be looked at, and that is asking to be loved.
yeah,
So that's empowering, and
totally. And the
that's
other
where it's at.
empowering piece of it is kind of how you were talking about in your early awakening, is that you realize that it started with you, that you had to take that radical self-accountability and exercise the radical self-compassion. It's
Mhm.
like the victim mentality just kind of like does not work for you anymore. And
No,
you have to come to that
no,
recognition that like it really is your internal environment that is creating everything as your reality.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, it's it's something in terms of like we want so much to feel safe and comfortable in our lives, and it's like it's after 11 years of living out here in the desert and having gone through many underworld journeys that were not of my own choosing,
Yeah. Most of them,
and
yeah.
what's interesting, just a little side note, is the myth of Inanna, which is like the descent into the underworld, which is what I incorporate into that descent into truth. In the myth, the underworld is referenced as the Kur, Kur. And I learned later, after I had already established descent into truth, that Kur is another word for desert. And I was just
Oh,
like, oof, I
ooh,
live
there
in
we
the
go.
underworld. Okay. Like this makes a lot of sense, because it's
Yeah.
completely disintegrated me. I have
Mm,
completely died and been reborn so many times here.
I love it.
And it's an ongoing, ever growing existence of transformation. And it's just like it's always happening. And so I recognize that, and I invite it in. I move towards discomfort, and I set up practices throughout not throughout the day, but I have practices every single day that are just oriented towards that exact thing. Like part of my daily practice is to take an ice cold bath every day.
Mm,
That's a massive initiation in moving towards discomfort.
yeah,
And so that, and I know that's what it is. Like, this is just helping me embrace discomfort. It's doing
sure.
a lot of other things too, but that's it. Never, there's always that feeling of just like, ooh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And once I get into that ice cold water, it's so rewarding,
Mm,
and I am completely transformed every single time I emerge from that ice cold water. And that's a really good metaphor for the underworld journey. It's like, I don't
mm,
want to do this work. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to feel this way. But once you're in it, it's so rich.
Yeah.
It's so infinite, and there is like infinite creative potential in that nothingness, in that darkness. And what is rebirthed is always something that we can't even imagine for ourselves.
Hmm. It's so amazing. Well, I loved this. It was really rich for me. And I'm thinking of fertile soil, and I'm thinking of the womb, and I'm thinking of all those references where we actually, to climb in, we are always supported. And I think that that's a good
Yes.
qualifier, is that no matter how the darkness shows and the shadow and whatever, we're always supported. And when we awake to that, that's when we are awakened to that. That's when it all shifts, and we can keep going into the discomfort, as you said. But you've done the work, you've done the practice, and I'd love to have you back so we can talk more about the
Mm,
priestess, but our time is up. So
yes.
um, we didn't really even get to that. But what is the best place for people to find you online?
On my website, angeladelaagua.com, I have my offerings of how you can work with me one-on-one on there. And I do run group remote programs from time to time. And I am starting to do more in-person experiences again. I do a lot of work with ceremony and working with cacao also. So
I love
ceremonial
your cacao. I
yeah,
take it. I love it.
it's another like directly connected in terms of the following the guidance of the heart and
Mhm.
accessing that love within. Cacao has been a huge teacher and ally for me that is a blessing to share with others. So you can find more about ceremonies, and I'm opening up more into holding really intimate transformational retreats in the coming year also. So
Oh, don't tempt
yes.
me.
Yes. I'm actually just coming out of a serious void period of like the last 3 months of,
Mm,
and for me, what that meant is like, I did not know what I would, what came next. And it was very clear, like, I have no idea what
mhm.
anything is. I don't know who I am anymore.
Oh, yay. I went through that too,
And
actually.
yeah.
Yeah. I was like,
and
wait, what?
and surrendering to that is the trick for sure, and just letting it be and not forcing life, not forcing work, just to for the sake of doing it kind of thing. And so I honored that void, and um just freshly on the other side of it, like everything has changed in like a couple of weeks.
That is
I,
I think that's the key, is just staying with it until it reveals
yeah,
what
because
it's,
it's not up to you in terms of the
we're not in
timing.
charge of it. No,
Yeah,
we're not.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's where the
definitely
surrender comes
the
in.
tricky part. And yeah, we're surrender really
Oh,
in.
love
All
it.
right.
Well, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your presence and all that you've brought to me personally. And like I said, we'll have you back and dive more into the priestess path, and how, that can reveal itself to those who are called into that in its many forms. So, but thank you so much for your
Love
time
that so
today.
much. Thank you, Cherie. Thank you so much. Such a joy to be here.